The great hall of Nexus 7 hummed with the voices of a dozen different species, each speaking in their native tongues while universal translators worked overtime to keep conversations flowing. Ambassador Korath adjusted his crystalline form to catch the artificial light just right, knowing that the way his body sparkled would remind everyone present of his people's superiority. Today marked the 15th annual Deathworld conference, and as always, the Vorthan Empire had much to boast about. Queen Thrix clicked her mandibles together in what passed for laughter among her kind as she watched a group of scaled Reptani delegates arguing over seating arrangements. The insectoid ruler found it amusing how these so-called apex survivors still worried about such trivial matters when they should be preparing to defend their achievements. Her own hive had conquered 3 radiation-soaked worlds in the past cycle alone, and she was eager to share the details with anyone brave enough to listen. The conference hall itself was a marvel of engineering, built specifically to accommodate the various environmental needs of species that had proven themselves capable of surviving on the galaxy's most hostile worlds. Sections of the floor could be heated to temperatures that would melt most metals, while other areas maintained atmospheric conditions that would freeze water instantly. Some delegates wore environmental suits, others had modified their biology so extensively that they barely resembled their original forms, and a few had transcended physical limitations entirely. Korath moved toward the central speaking platform, his crystalline feet making soft chiming sounds against the specially designed floor that could support his considerable weight, while still allowing him to create the harmonic resonances his people use for emphasis during important speeches. He had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering data and imagery from the latest Vorthan conquest on Pyros, a world where acid rain fell constantly and the very air could dissolve unprotected flesh in minutes. Honored survivors, Korath began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic enhancement systems. We gather once again to celebrate our triumphs over the forces that would destroy lesser beings. His form shifted colors as he spoke, moving from deep purple to brilliant gold, a visual display that reinforced his words with the full weight of Vorthan genetic conditioning. The Vorthan Empire has achieved what many thought impossible. We have not merely survived on Pyros, we have built cities that thrive in conditions that would challenge the very gods themselves. The holographic display above the platform flickered to life, showing images of towering spires that seemed to grow from the hostile landscape of Pyros like beautiful flowers blooming in poison. The assembled delegates made sounds of approval and recognition, understanding the incredible feat of engineering and biological adaptation required to make such construction possible. Some had attempted similar projects on their own conquered worlds and knew firsthand the challenges involved. Queen Thrix rose from her specially designed seating area, her compound eyes reflecting the light from the hologram as she prepared her own presentation. The hive had recently finished establishing permanent colonies on the Gamma Centauri moons, where radiation levels were so intense that they had required extensive genetic modification of her warrior caste to even attempt the mission. The success had cost them nearly half their military force, but the strategic advantages gained were worth any price. The hive acknowledges the achievements of our crystalline allies, she said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated deep respect among her people. However, we must also recognize that true mastery over death itself requires sacrifice. Our warriors gave their very genetic heritage to claim worlds that burn with the fire of dying stars. We have literally remade ourselves to inherit what others could not even approach. The display changed to show her warriors moving across landscapes that glowed with residual radiation, their modified exoskeletons serving as both protection and weapons. The transformation process had been brutal, but the results spoke for themselves. Her people now possessed the ability to harness radioactive energy directly, turning the deadly radiation into a source of power that made them nearly unstoppable in certain environments. As the presentations continued, each species took their turn to display their greatest achievements in conquering hostile worlds. The Reptani showed footage of their underwater cities on high-pressure worlds where the ocean depths would crush most materials like paper. The energy beings known as the Flux demonstrated their mastery over plasma storms that could tear apart molecular bonds. Each presentation was more impressive than the last, creating an atmosphere of friendly competition that pushed everyone to reveal their most closely guarded secrets. It was during the third cycle of presentations that the unexpected announcement came. A small chime indicated an incoming priority message, and the conference moderator, a mechanical construct known as Unit 7, projected a new hologram above the speaking platform. The image showed a simple message in the common trade language used throughout the galaxy. "Attention Deathworld Conference participants," the message read. "The Galactic Council has approved the inclusion of a newly contacted species in this cycle's proceedings. Representatives of the Human Federation from the Sol system have been granted observer status and are currently en route to Nexus 7, estimated arrival in 6 standard hours." The hall fell silent for a moment before erupting in various sounds of surprise, confusion, and in some cases, outright amusement. Ambassador Korith's crystalline form shifted to a deep red color that indicated skepticism among his people, while Queenthrix's mandibles clicked rapidly in what was clearly agitation rather than amusement this time. "Sol system?" called out one of the Reptani delegates, his scaled head turning toward Unit 7. "That designation is not in our databases of significant Deathworld classifications. What achievements have these humans demonstrated to warrant inclusion in our conference?" Unit 7's mechanical voice carried no emotion as it responded with the available data. "The Human Federation has submitted preliminary reports indicating successful colonization of their homeworld, designated as Earth, along with basic technological achievements consistent with early spacefaring capability. The Galactic Council has determined that exposure to established Deathworld protocols may provide educational benefit to this developing species." The assembled delegates exchanged glances that clearly communicated their shared opinion of this development. It seemed that the Council had decided to use their conference as a teaching opportunity for some primitive species that had barely managed to survive on what was probably a barely challenging world. Such decisions were not uncommon, as the Council often used these gatherings to humble newly contacted civilizations by showing them what real achievement looked like. Ambassador Korith returned to his central position on the speaking platform, his form now displaying the cool blue color that indicated benevolent condescension. "Fellow survivors," he announced, "it appears we shall have the opportunity to demonstrate the true meaning of Deathworld mastery to these humans. Perhaps witnessing our achievements will inspire them to greater efforts in their own development, or at least provide them with realistic expectations of their place in the galactic community." The mood in the hall shifted from surprise to anticipation as the delegates began to see this unexpected addition as an opportunity rather than an interruption. There was something satisfying about demonstrating superior capabilities to a less advanced species, and many of them began mentally reviewing their presentations to ensure maximum impact on these newcomers. The humans would learn quickly that survival on a real Deathworld required more than primitive technology and good intentions. Queenthrix settled back into her seating area, already planning how she would present the genetic modifications her people had undergone to master their radioactive conquests. The humans would need to understand that true Deathworld survival often required abandoning one's original form entirely, accepting changes that lesser species might consider horrific, but which represented the ultimate commitment to conquest. Over hostile environments. As the conference resumed with renewed energy, none of the assembled delegates could have predicted that their invitation to these unknown humans would fundamentally alter not just their gathering, but their understanding of what it truly meant to be survivors in a hostile galaxy. The docking bay of Nexus 7 had seen countless vessels arrive over the years, from the massive bioships of the Hive to the geometric perfection of Vorthan crystal carriers, but the human transport that settled onto the designated landing pad looked almost disappointingly ordinary. Dr. Hayes stepped out first, followed by Captain Roberts and two other humans who moved with the casual confidence of beings who had never encountered a truly hostile environment. Ambassador Korath watched from the observation deck as the human delegation made their way through the station's corridors, noting how they seemed completely at ease despite being surrounded by species that could kill them in dozens of different ways without technological assistance. Their soft pink skin looked fragile compared to the armored exoskeletons, crystalline surfaces, and energy-based forms that filled the corridors around them. They appear even more primitive than the report suggested, Queen Thrix commented as she joined Korath at the observation window, her compound eyes tracking the humans' movement with predatory interest. Look at how they walk, completely unaware of potential threats, no defensive posturing whatsoever. Their homeworld must be remarkably peaceful to produce such naive behavior. The conference hall had been reconfigured with a small section designated for the human observers, positioned where they could see and hear everything clearly while remaining safely separated from the more dangerous delegates, Dr. Hayes and Captain Roberts took their seats with polite nods to the surrounding species, seemingly unbothered by the fact that several of the assembled beings were literally toxic to organic life. Unit 7 began the day's proceedings by calling for the human delegation to present their homeworld's data for classification purposes. This was standard protocol when new species attended the conference, both to establish their credentials and to help them understand their position relative to the established Deathworld survivors. Dr. Hayes rose from her seat and approached the speaking platform with the kind of calm confidence that the assembled delegates immediately recognized as either supreme courage or complete ignorance of the situation she was walking into. Her voice carried clearly through the hall's amplification systems as she began what most expected to be a brief and somewhat embarrassing presentation. Thank you for this opportunity to share information about our homeworld, Hayes began, activating a holographic display that showed a blue and green sphere rotating slowly in space. Earth is located in what we consider a fairly typical star system, orbiting a main sequence star at a distance that allows for liquid water to exist on the surface. Several delegates made sounds that roughly translated to polite interest, though. Ambassador Korath's color shifted to indicate mild amusement. A world with liquid water and a stable star sounded like the kind of paradise that most species could only dream of colonizing. Our atmosphere consists primarily of nitrogen and oxygen, Hayes continued, with trace amounts of various other gases. This creates some interesting weather patterns that we've learned to work with over the millennia. The hologram zoomed in to show massive spiral formations moving across the planet's surface, with Hayes pointing to each formation as she spoke. These are what we call hurricanes or typhoons, depending on which ocean they form over, she explained, matter-of-factly. Wind speeds in these systems regularly exceed 200 kilometers per hour, and they can maintain that intensity for weeks as they move across thousands of kilometers of ocean surface. The precipitation during these events can measure over 30 centimeters per hour, while electrical discharges number in the millions per day during peak activity. The casual tone in which Hayes described these phenomena caused the first stirrings of unease among the assembled delegates. Wind speeds of 200 kilometers per hour were approaching the levels that required serious structural engineering to survive, and the electrical discharge numbers seemed excessive even for a moderately active world. Of course, those are just the regular seasonal patterns, Hayes continued, seemingly unaware of the growing tension in her audience. Our planet's geological activity creates additional challenges that we've had to adapt to over time. The holographic display shifted to show cross-sections of the planet's interior, revealing the complex system of moving plates that formed Earth's surface. Hayes gestured toward the display as she explained how these massive slabs of rock were in constant motion, grinding against each other with forces that could build mountain ranges or trigger seismic events. The energy released during major seismic events can measure up to magnitude 9.5 on our logarithmic scale, she said, her tone remaining conversational despite describing forces that could level most galactic cities. These events can trigger secondary effects like massive waves, sometimes exceeding 30 meters in height, that travel across entire ocean basins at speeds of over 700 kilometers per hour. Queen Thrix's mandibles had stopped their usual clicking as she processed this information. Her own hive had conquered worlds with geological instability, but the scale Hayes was describing seemed excessive for a planet that still supported complex life. The presentation continued with Hayes describing Earth's volcanic activity, explaining how molten rock could suddenly burst from the planet's surface, creating temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius and filling the atmosphere with ash and toxic gases. She showed images of these eruptions with the same calm demeanor one might use to describe a pleasant sunset. The biological diversity on our world has adapted to these conditions quite remarkably, Hayes said, switching to a new set of images that caused several delegates to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Our apex predators have developed impressive capabilities over millions of years of evolution. The hologram now displayed creatures that looked like they belonged in the nightmares of civilized species. Hayes pointed to each image as she described bite forces exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch, venom that could shut down neural systems in minutes, and pack-hunting behaviors that demonstrated complex tactical thinking. Our marine environments present their own unique challenges, she continued, showing images of the deep ocean trenches that plunged to depths where pressure levels would crush most known materials. Some of our sea life has adapted to pressures over 1,000 times greater than its surface level, while others have developed bioluminescence to navigate in complete darkness. Ambassador Korath found his crystalline structure flickering through different colors as he tried to process what he was hearing. The environmental conditions Hayes was describing so casually would qualify as extreme hazards on most civilized worlds, requiring extensive technological support or genetic modification to survive. Perhaps most interesting from a survival perspective, Hayes said, are the microscopic life forms that exist throughout our biosphere. Some of these organisms can consume organic tissue. Others can survive in conditions ranging from near absolute zero to temperatures that would boil water. They exist in every environment on our planet, from the deepest ocean trenches to the upper atmosphere. The hall had grown completely silent as the delegates realized that what they were hearing was not the description of a peaceful paradise world, but rather a comprehensive catalog of environmental hazards that would challenge even their most advanced survival technologies. The casual way in which Hayes presented this information suggested that humans considered these conditions normal rather than exceptional. Dr. Hayes concluded her presentation by returning to the image of Earth as seen from space, its blue and green surface looking deceptively peaceful after everything she had just described. We find our homeworld provides an excellent environment for developing the adaptability and resourcefulness that seem to be valued in galactic civilization, she said with a slight smile. Captain Roberts joined Hayes at the speaking platform, his expression serious as he addressed the now completely attentive audience. Dr. Hayes has covered the basic environmental parameters of our homeworld, he said. However, I think it's important that you understand how humanity has responded to these challenges over the course of our development. The silence in the hall was broken only by the soft humming of the station's life support systems as every delegate waited to hear what these seemingly fragile beings had accomplished on a world that was beginning to sound like one of the most hostile environments any of them had ever encountered. Ambassador Korath's crystalline form had settled into a deep purple color that indicated serious concern, while Queen Thrix remained perfectly still, her predatory instincts fully engaged as she began to reassess these unexpected visitors. Unit 7's mechanical sensors were recording everything, already flagging this presentation for immediate transmission to the Galactic Council. If the human data was accurate, then the galaxy had just made contact with a species that considered high-level Deathworld conditions to be their natural habitat, and nobody had any idea what that might mean for the established order of civilized space. The emergency recess had lasted 3 hours while Unit 7 worked with the Galactic Council's verification systems to confirm the accuracy of human data regarding their homeworld conditions. Ambassador Korath spent that time reviewing his own people's colonization records, trying to understand how beings that look so fragile could survive on a world that made some of their greatest achievements look modest by comparison. Queen Thrix used a break to consult with her genetic specialist back on the homeworld, running calculations on what level of biological modification would be required for her warriors to survive unprotected on Earth's surface. The preliminary results were disturbing enough that she had ordered the data classified at the highest levels. When the conference reconvened, the atmosphere in the Great Hall had changed completely. The casual dismissal and benevolent condescension that had characterized the delegates' initial attitude toward the humans had been replaced by something much more complex. Respect, wariness, and in some cases what could only be described as fear now colored their interactions. Captain Roberts moved to the speaking platform with the same unhurried confidence he had displayed throughout their visit, but now that confidence looked less like ignorance and more like the natural bearing of someone who had never encountered a challenge that could not be overcome. His voice carried easily through the hall as he began to address the assembled delegates. "I understand there was some question about the accuracy of our data," Roberts said, his tone remaining friendly despite the obvious tension in the room. "I want to assure you that Dr. Hayes was actually being somewhat conservative in her descriptions. Earth is considered a fairly typical world by human standards, and many of our people actively seek out more challenging environments for recreation and personal development." The statement hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. What they had just verified as extreme Deathworld conditions were considered typical, and humans voluntarily exposed themselves to worse environments for entertainment. Roberts activated his own holographic display, showing images of human settlements scattered across Earth's surface in locations that would challenge the survival equipment of most galactic species. "Humanity has established permanent colonies in every major biome on our planet," he explained, pointing to cities built on frozen tundra where temperatures regularly dropped below -40°C. "These northern settlements exist in conditions where exposed skin can freeze solid in minutes," Roberts continued matter-of-factly. "But we have developed construction techniques and social systems that allow families to raise children there safely. Our coldest permanently inhabited settlement records winter temperatures below -60°C, and the residents consider it a perfectly normal place to live." The display shifted to show settlements in desert regions where surface temperatures exceeded 50°C, and water sources were separated by hundreds of kilometers of hostile terrain. Roberts explained how humans had not only survived in these conditions but had built complex irrigation systems and trade networks that supported populations in the millions. "Our mountain settlements present interesting engineering challenges," Roberts said, showing images of cities built at altitudes where the atmospheric pressure was less than half of sea level. "The reduced oxygen levels would be fatal to most galactic species without technological assistance, but human children born at these altitudes adapt naturally and can work and play in conditions that would leave our lowland populations struggling to breathe." Ambassador Korath's crystalline form was now cycling through colors so rapidly that it created a strobe effect, indicating extreme agitation. His people required extensive technological support to function at the altitudes Roberts was describing so casually, and the idea that human children could be born and raised in such conditions challenged fundamental assumptions about biological limitations. The presentation continued with Roberts describing human achievements in what he called oceanic exploration, showing images of vessels that could dive to the deepest parts of Earth's oceans where pressure levels would flatten most galactic materials into molecular soup. "Our deep-sea exploration vehicles regularly operate at depths where the pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres," he explained. "We've established research stations on the ocean floor and have mapped terrain that exists in conditions more hostile than the surface of most airless worlds." Queen Thrix felt her genetic specialists' calculations becoming increasingly irrelevant as Roberts continued. The modifications her people had undergone to survive on radiation-soaked moons seemed almost trivial compared to what humans were accomplishing without any visible biological enhancement. Perhaps more impressive than our adaptation to extreme environments, Robert said, is the speed at which we accomplish these adaptations. While most species require generations of genetic modification or extensive technological support to colonize challenging worlds, human populations can establish successful settlements within a single generation using primarily behavioral and technological adaptations. The implications of this statement sent ripples of unease through the assembled delegates. Most of their greatest Deathworld achievements had required centuries of preparation, extensive biological modification, or technological development programs that consumed the resources of entire civilizations. Humans appeared to accomplish similar feats as routine expansions of their population base. Dr. Hayes rejoined Roberts at the speaking platform, carrying a data tablet that she consulted as she spoke. Captain Roberts has covered our basic settlement patterns, she said, but I think it's important that you understand the full scope of human environmental adaptation. Hayes activated a new display showing a complex chart with environmental parameters on multiple axes. This represents the range of conditions in which unmodified humans can survive and maintain reproductive populations, she explained, highlighting areas of the chart that encompassed temperature ranges, pressure variations, atmospheric compositions, and radiation levels that would challenge the survival equipment of most galactic civilizations. We should probably mention, Hayes continued with what appeared to be slight embarrassment, that these measurements represent the conditions we encounter naturally on our homeworld. They do not include the extended ranges we can achieve using our standard survival equipment, which we consider basic technology available to any human who might need it. The casual mention of survival equipment that could extend human operational ranges beyond what they considered their natural habitat created a profound silence in the hall. Every delegate was now engaged in rapid mental calculations, trying to understand what they were dealing with. Roberts resumed speaking, his voice carrying a note of what might have been apology. I realize this information might seem overwhelming, but I want to emphasize that humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We're primarily curious about other forms of life and eager to learn about the achievements of established galactic civilizations. The irony of these words was not lost on any of the assembled delegates. Here was a species offering to learn from civilizations whose greatest achievements would barely qualify as challenging environments by human standards. We do hope, Hayes added, that our presence here will lead to productive exchanges of knowledge and technology. Earth has identified several worlds in our local region that appear suitable for human colonization, and we would welcome guidance from more experienced Deathworld survivors on the proper protocols for expansion. Ambassador Korath finally managed to stabilize his coloration long enough to speak, though his voice carried harmonics that indicated deep uncertainty. When you say suitable for human colonization, he asked carefully, what environmental parameters are you considering acceptable? Hayes consulted her data tablet briefly before responding. Our initial surveys have identified 17 worlds within 50 light-years that feature surface conditions comparable to Earth's more challenging regions, she said. Most of them have somewhat higher gravity, more extreme temperature variations, or atmospheric compositions that would require basic breathing apparatus, but nothing that would prevent normal family life. The revelation that humans considered worlds requiring breathing apparatus suitable for family colonization created another wave of stunned silence. These beings were not just survivors of an extreme death world. They were actively seeking out environments that would challenge even the most experienced galactic species as locations to raise their children. Queen Thrix finally found her voice, though her usual commanding tone had been replaced by something that sounded almost like reverence. Your species accomplished all of this without genetic modification? She asked. For the most part, yes, Roberts replied. We've made some minor improvements in areas like disease resistance and longevity, but nothing that would change our fundamental biology. Most of our adaptation to challenging environments comes from technological innovation, social cooperation, and what we call determination. The word determination resonated through the hall's translation systems, but every delegate understood that the simple term was completely inadequate to describe whatever force had enabled these beings to master conditions that challenged the greatest achievements of galactic civilization. Unit 7's sensors were recording not just the conversation but the physiological responses of every delegate in the hall. The mechanical construct was already preparing a priority report that would fundamentally alter the Galactic Council's understanding of what it meant to be apex survivors in a hostile galaxy. The simulation chambers of Nexus 7 had been designed to recreate the most hostile environments encountered by galactic civilization, serving both as training facilities and testing grounds for new survival technologies. Ambassador Korath stood before the primary control console, his crystalline fingers dancing across interfaces that could generate conditions capable of killing most known life forms within seconds. If you truly believe your species possesses the adaptability you claim, Korath said, his voice carrying harmonics of skepticism mixed with what might have been hope for vindication, then perhaps you would be willing to demonstrate these capabilities under controlled conditions. Captain. Roberts exchanged a glance with Dr. Hayes before nodding his agreement. We would be happy to participate in whatever testing procedures you consider appropriate, he said. However, I should mention that we didn't bring any specialized equipment with us, so we'll be limited to whatever standard gear we have on hand. Queen? Thrix's mandibles clicked softly as she reviewed the simulation parameters on her personal display. We shall begin with Pyros, she announced. The acid world conquest that represents one of our civilization's greatest achievements. The atmospheric composition includes sulfuric acid vapor at concentrations that will dissolve unprotected organic tissue in less than 10 minutes. The first simulation chamber hummed to life, its walls shifting color as atmospheric processors began generating the hellish environment of Pyros. Through the observation windows, the assembled delegates could see acid rain beginning to fall while the air itself took on the yellow-green tinge that indicated extreme toxicity. Ambassador Korath entered the chamber wearing his full environmental suit, a crystalline construction that had taken his people decades to perfect for Pyros operations. The suit's life support systems were visible as glowing conduits running throughout the structure, constantly filtering and neutralizing the hostile environment that surrounded him. Captain Roberts approached the chamber wearing his standard uniform and a basic atmospheric converter that looked almost primitive compared to Korath's advanced protection system. The converter was a simple device that covered his nose and mouth, leaving most of his body exposed to conditions that should have killed him in minutes. Are you certain about this? Dr. Hayes asked, though her tone suggested concern for protocol rather than genuine worry about Robert's safety. Standard exposure drill, Roberts replied, stepping into the chamber with the casual confidence of someone entering a mildly unpleasant room rather than a death trap that had challenged one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. The assembled delegates watched in fascination as Roberts moved through the simulated Pyros environment, not just surviving but actively exploring and analyzing his surroundings. Within minutes, he had identified 3 separate methods for neutralizing the atmospheric toxins using materials that could be found naturally on the planet's surface. The mineral formations contain natural buffering compounds, Roberts explained. Through the chamber's communication system, his voice perfectly clear despite the fact that he was breathing air that should have been liquefying his lung tissue. With basic chemical processing, you could establish atmospheric safe zones around any settlement. The acid rain actually makes the process easier because it concentrates the useful minerals in predictable locations. Korath stared at the human through his suit's viewing ports, trying to understand how Roberts was not only surviving but actually improving upon Vorthan colonization techniques while standing in an environment that required the most advanced protective systems his people had ever developed. Queen Thrix activated the second simulation chamber, this one designed to replicate the radiation-soaked moons where her hive had achieved their greatest conquest. The chamber's walls began emitting the kind of energy signatures that required extensive genetic modification for her warriors to survive, even with their natural radiation resistance. This environment features gamma radiation at levels exceeding 10,000 roentgens per hour, she announced, her voice carrying the pride of someone describing an achievement that had cost her people dearly to accomplish. My warriors required complete genetic restructuring to operate in these conditions, and even then could only maintain activity for limited periods. Dr. Hayes entered the radiation chamber wearing standard clothing and carrying what appeared to be a basic scientific instrument kit. The assembled delegates expected to see her succumb to radiation poisoning within minutes, but instead watched as she began collecting samples of the radioactive crystals while explaining their potential uses. "This is actually quite interesting," Hayes said, her voice carrying clearly through the communication system as she examined glowing mineral formations that were pumping out lethal radiation. The crystal structure would make an excellent shielding material if properly arranged, and the energy output could power substantial industrial operations. You could easily build self-sustaining settlements by using the radiation as an energy source while creating protected habitats from the local geology. Queen Thrix felt her certainty about hive superiority crumbling as she watched Hayes not only survive conditions that had required the sacrifice of her people's genetic heritage to master, but identify improvements to techniques that had taken generations to develop. The testing continued with each species presenting their most challenging conquered environment, and each time the pattern repeated itself. Environments that had required extensive biological modification, advanced technological support, or civilizational-level resource commitments were casually survived by humans using what they described as basic equipment and standard training. The scaled Reptani presented their deep ocean world where crushing pressures had required them to completely redesign their physiology. Captain Roberts survived the simulation using a simple pressure suit that he mentioned was standard equipment for human underwater exploration, then proceeded to identify optimal locations for submarine cities based on geological formations and current patterns. The energy-based flux demonstrated their mastery over plasma storm environments that could disrupt matter at the molecular level. Dr. Hayes entered their simulation, wearing a basic electromagnetic field generator that humans apparently used for routine space operations, then explained how the plasma storms could be harnessed to create manufacturing systems that would revolutionize materials science. Each successful demonstration created deeper silence in the observation area as the assembled delegates struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. These were not beings who had barely survived on a marginally hostile world. These were apex predators from the galaxy's most dangerous environment casually, demonstrating survival techniques that made their greatest achievements look primitive. The final test came when Ambassador Korath, in consultation with the other delegates, created a combination environment that incorporated the worst elements from all their conquered worlds. Acid rain fell through a radioactive atmosphere onto a surface racked by seismic activity while plasma storms raged overhead and crushing pressures threatened to flatten any structure into molecular debris. This environment exceeds anything that exists naturally in known space, Korath announced, his crystalline form now permanently locked into the deep red coloration that indicated extreme stress. No single species has ever attempted to survive such conditions, as the combination of hazards creates exponential increases in lethality. Roberts and Hayes entered the impossible environment together, and the delegates watched in stunned silence as they not only survived but began working together to establish the foundations of what could become a permanent settlement. They identified safe zones, located resource deposits, and developed techniques for creating protective structures, using nothing but materials available in the hostile environment itself. This actually reminds me of a camping trip I took in the Australian outback when I was 12, Roberts commented casually as he helped Hayes construct a shelter that was somehow remaining stable despite the multiple catastrophic forces trying to destroy it. Really? Hayes replied, using what appeared to be basic chemistry to neutralize acid rain, while simultaneously converting radioactive materials into useful building supplies. I was thinking more like that survival course they made us take before our first deep-sea research assignment. though I admit the plasma storms add an interesting challenge. The casual conversation between the two humans as they worked in conditions that would instantly kill most galactic species created a profound shift in the consciousness of every delegate present. These beings were not just survivors, they were beings for whom survival in the impossible was so routine that it triggered childhood memories and casual professional comparisons. When Roberts and Hayes finally exited the simulation chamber, they found themselves facing a completely transformed audience. The condescension and amusement that had characterized the initial response to their presence had been replaced by something that looked very much like awe mixed with a healthy dose of fear. Ambassador Korath was the first to speak, though his voice now carried harmonics that indicated deep respect rather than skeptical challenge. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our most optimistic projections for Deathworld survival, he said carefully. We must now ask what your intentions are regarding expansion into galactic space. The question hung in the air like a physical presence as every delegate waited to learn whether humanity would be joining galactic civilization as allies or conquerors. Though at this point the distinction seemed largely academic given what they had just witnessed. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been convened within hours of Unit 7's priority transmission from Nexus 7. Representatives from every major civilization were present, either physically or through quantum communication links, as they struggled to process the implications of what had been discovered about humanity. High Counselor Vex, an ancient being whose energy form had transcended physical limitations millennia ago, spoke first to the assembled representatives. We have confirmed the accuracy of all data submitted by the human delegation, the High Counselor announced, the words carrying through subspace to every corner of civilized space. Our most advanced analysis systems have verified that Earth qualifies as a Class 12 Deathworld using our standard classification system. The silence that followed this announcement was broken only by the various mechanical and biological sounds of shocked representatives attempting to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about survival and adaptation in the galaxy. For reference, High Counselor Vex continued, no known civilization has successfully colonized a world above Class 7 without extensive technological support or fundamental biological modification. The human delegation has provided evidence that their species considers Class 12 conditions to be normal environmental parameters suitable for family life. Back on Nexus 7, the Deathworld Conference had transformed into something resembling a diplomatic summit as delegates who had arrived expecting to demonstrate their superiority now found themselves negotiating with beings whose very existence redefined what was possible in terms of environmental adaptation. Captain Roberts addressed the assembled delegates with the same calm professionalism he had maintained throughout their stay, though now that demeanor was recognized for what it truly was, the natural confidence of a being who had never encountered an insurmountable challenge. Humanity appreciates the opportunity to participate in these proceedings, Roberts said, his words carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. We've learned a great deal about galactic civilization and the achievements of established species. We hope that our presence here represents the beginning of productive relationships with all of your peoples. Ambassador Korath stepped forward, his crystalline form now displaying the deep blue coloration that indicated profound respect among his people. Captain Roberts, Dr. Hayes, on behalf of the assembled delegates, I must ask about humanity's intentions regarding territorial expansion. Your demonstrated capabilities suggest that worlds we consider unconquerable would pose little challenge to your colonization efforts. Dr. Hayes consulted her data tablet before responding, her tone remaining conversational despite the weight of the question. Our immediate expansion plans are quite modest by galactic standards, she said. We've identified 17 worlds within our local region that appear suitable for human settlement. Most of them feature environmental conditions that we consider moderately challenging but well within acceptable parameters for establishing family communities. Queen Thrix's compound eyes focused intently on the human scientist as she processed this information. When you say moderately challenging, she Ask carefully, could you provide specific environmental classifications for these target worlds? Hayes activated a holographic display showing the 17 worlds humanity had identified for colonization. The assembled delegates studied the data with growing amazement as they realized that every single world on the list would require extensive preparation and technological support for their own species to even attempt settlement. This world here features surface temperatures ranging from -70 to +80 degrees Celsius with regular volcanic activity and an atmosphere containing 12% sulfur compounds. Hayes pointed to one of the displayed planets. We consider it roughly equivalent to some of Earth's more interesting polar regions, suitable for standard family settlements with basic environmental controls. The casual description of conditions that would challenge the most advanced survival technologies possessed by galactic civilization created another wave of stunned silence among the delegates. What humans considered suitable for raising children would serve as extreme survival training for the galaxy's most elite specialists. Captain Roberts took over the presentation, highlighting another world on the display. This one has been designated as a potential recreational site, he said matter-of-factly. The high radiation levels and corrosive atmosphere would make it ideal for adventure tourism and extreme sports training. We estimate it could support several million visitors annually once basic infrastructure is established. The revelation that humans intended to use a world that would kill most galactic species within minutes as a vacation destination fundamentally altered every delegate's understanding of what they were dealing with. These beings were not just survivors, they were beings who actively sought out hostile environments for entertainment. Unit 7's mechanical voice interrupted the proceedings with an announcement that sent ripples of anticipation through the hall. Priority communication incoming from the Galactic Council High Command. All delegates are requested to maintain current positions for official transmission. The holographic display shifted to show High Counselor Vex addressing the conference, directly from the council chambers. After extensive deliberation and verification of submitted data, the Galactic Council has reached several important decisions regarding humanity's integration into galactic civilization. Roberts and Hayes exchanged glances but remained silent, allowing the High Counselor to continue without interruption. First, the Human Federation is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Council with all rights and privileges, accorded to Class of Civilizations. This membership includes territorial rights to any worlds within their designated expansion zone that they can successfully colonize using their demonstrated capabilities. Ambassador Chorus' crystalline form flickered through several colors as he processed the implications of this announcement. Class of civilization status was reserved for species that had demonstrated mastery over multiple Deathworld environments, and it came with territorial rights that most civilizations spent centuries earning. Second, High Counselor Vex continued, humanity is hereby designated as the Galactic Authority on Extreme Environment Survival and Colonization. All requests for Deathworld classification and colonization protocols will be submitted to human specialists for evaluation and approval. Queen Thrix felt her understanding of galactic hierarchy crumbling as she realized that her people's greatest achievements would now be subject to evaluation by beings who considered her most challenging conquests to be suitable for family vacations. Third, the Galactic Council requests that humanity establish training facilities for other species interested in improving their Deathworld survival capabilities. We believe that human expertise in this area could significantly advance the colonization potential of all galactic civilizations. Dr. Hayes stepped forward to respond to the High Counselor's announcements. Humanity accepts membership in the Galactic Council and looks forward to productive cooperation with all member species, she said formally. We would be honored to share our survival techniques and training methods with any civilization interested in expanding their environmental adaptation capabilities. The offer of human training sent excited whispers through the assembled delegates as they began to imagine what their own species might accomplish with access to techniques that had enabled humans to master conditions that challenged the laws of physics. Captain Roberts added his own thoughts to Hayes' acceptance. We should mention that Earth's educational system includes mandatory survival training for all citizens, he said. What we consider basic knowledge might prove valuable to species interested in expanding their operational capabilities. We would welcome the opportunity to establish exchange programs with interested civilizations. The casual mention that every human received training in what amounted to advanced Deathworld survival techniques created another, profound shift in the delegates' understanding of what they were dealing with. This was not a civilization with a few exceptional specialists. This was an entire species where every individual possessed capabilities that would qualify them as elite specialists by galactic standards. Ambassador Korath spoke for the assembled delegates as he formally acknowledged the new galactic order that had emerged from what was supposed to be a routine demonstration of superior survival techniques. On behalf of all represented civilizations, we welcome humanity to the Galactic Council and look forward to learning from your expertise in environmental adaptation. The formality of the moment was broken when Dr. Hayes smiled and made a comment that would become legendary in galactic diplomatic circles. We're excited to be here, she said. Earth is looking forward to finally meeting neighbors who might be interested in visiting some of our more challenging vacation destinations. As the conference concluded and delegates began making preparations to return to their respective worlds, each carried with them the knowledge that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The species they had invited to observe their achievements had instead demonstrated that humanity represented the apex of environmental adaptation, beings for whom the impossible was routine and the deadly was recreational. Unit 7's final log entry from the conference would become required reading in diplomatic training programs. Throughout the galaxy, contact established with human civilization has resulted in complete reevaluation of survival capability classifications. Previous understanding of Deathworld mastery has been rendered obsolete. Recommend immediate revision of all colonization protocols and territorial expansion strategies. Note: human delegation expressed interest in establishing recreational facilities on worlds previously classified as uninhabitable. Request guidance on appropriate response to species that considers galactic-class deathworlds suitable for family entertainment. The invitation that was meant to humble a primitive species had instead introduced the galaxy to its new teachers, beings whose casual mastery of the impossible would reshape every aspect of civilized expansion into the hostile depths of space. The delegates who returned home carried with them stories that would inspire some civilizations and terrify others, but all would remember the day they learned what it truly meant to be survivors in a dangerous galaxy.